didn't want to have a seminar, Capitalism and Morality, sullied by a discussion of Donald Trump. So we're away from the formal conference, and now we're doing a very informal presentation. Okay, so what's the argument in favor of Donald Trump? To me, the way I see libertarianism, it has views on three different areas. One is economics, another is personal liberties, and a third is foreign policy. And the problem I have with the Nolan chart and all these other charts is they only do economics and personal liberties. Now, I'm an economist. I think economics is pretty important. But I think foreign policy is more important. Not only more important, but a ton more important, if I could categorize it that way. Not only do I think it's more important than either of them, but it's more important than both of them put together. So why is it that foreign policy is more important than the other two put together? For two reasons. One, foreign policy kills a lot of people, and I'm sort of pro-life. I don't like the idea of innocent human beings being killed. And if we have World War III, it'll ruin our whole day and maybe even our whole week with a transfer of nuclear arms between us and China and Russia. It'd be a very, very bad thing. Secondly, as Murray Rothbard and Bob Higgs have shown over and over and over again, it's not that economics leads to foreign policy, it's a two-way street. But the main traffic is from foreign policy to economics and from foreign policy to personal liberty. When Bob Higgs talks about the ratchet effect, what the ratchet effect is whenever you have a war, civil liberties are abridged, free speech is abridged, taxes rise. When the war is over, taxes fall, but never to the level that they were before. So there's a ratchet.
Until he takes off, it's going to be impossible to hear. He's just going to take off in a second.
Tell him to shut up.
Oh, yeah. Hey, foreign policy, we can shoot him.
Okay, so I'm claiming that foreign policy is way more important than the other two. One, because it kills more people. Economics can kill people too. Venezuela, North Korea, people starve. But foreign policy kills people wholesale. Economics kills them retail. Although in the Ukraine during the famine, they were killed wholesale there too, so I don't want to make too much of that. But still, I think foreign policy is much more important. One, because it kills many more people. And two, because it impacts economics and personal liberties through this ratchet effect. When the war is over, we reduce taxes, but it never gets back down to where it was before. It keeps rising. Okay, so how do we compare Hillary and Donald? And I'll get to Gary in a minute. But just suppose it's between Hillary and Donald. Who is less likely to get us into World War III? My claim is Donald. Donald has said a bunch of good things. Donald has said, I can get along with Putin. He has a bromance with Putin. Putin likes Donald, Donald likes Putin. Hillary never said anything remotely resembling that. Donald said, let's rethink NATO. What is NATO doing now? They're having war games right on Russia's front door. Imagine if Russia had war games near New Jersey, or in Mexico, or in Canada. The United States would not feel too happy about that. Donald Trump has said, we never should have gone into Libya. Hillary said, we came, we saw, and we killed them, or something like that, with regard to Gaddafi. This is murderous. Donald said, we never should have got rid of Saddam Hussein. Now, Saddam Hussein was not a good guy. He was not a libertarian. Nor was Gaddafi. But who do we have instead? We have ISIS. And most people will agree that ISIS is worse than these strong men. And now Hillary wants to get Bashar Assad in Syria. Donald said, look, we screwed up in Libya, we screwed up in Iraq. Now you want to go screw up in Syria? Not on my watch. So he said several good things. Now it's true he also contradicted himself a little bit. What the heck? He's a politician. You know, what do you want from the poor guy? He has to contradict himself. But Hillary contradicts herself a little bit, less than Donald. But we can trust Hillary more. She's more solid as a warmonger. So you never know what you're getting. But it seems that the case can be made that Donald is less likely to get us into a war than Hillary is. Now, there are some libertarians who say, well, we should eschew politics. We shouldn't dirty our hands with that. I have a two-word refutation of that. Ron Paul. Ron Paul was in politics. He did not good work, magnificent work. We shouldn't give up on politics. And also I had this thing about suppose we were slaves and the master said that you can vote for overseer goody or overseer baddie. Overseer goody will beat the crap out of us once a month. Overseer baddie will beat the crap out of us every day. And we vote for overseer goody because we don't want to be beaten up as much. Does that mean we like overseer goody? No, we're just picking the lesser of two evils. Does that mean we support slavery, us slaves? No, we don't, but we just want to be beaten up less. Well, it's the same thing with Hillary versus Donald. We have to pick the lesser of the two evils. Now, I started this group called Libertarians for Trump. When I started it, Trump was still involved in the Republican fight against Cruz and Kasich, and I thought that they were going to cheat Donald out of it. Now, Cruz is a warmonger, and Kasich is too. Donald was way better than Cruz and Kasich on foreign policy, and I think I've established that foreign policy is very important. So I supported Donald vis-a-vis his Republican people, and I now support Donald versus Hillary because Hillary is more likely to be a warmonger. Now, it's true. What's that joke? How do you tell when a politician is lying? Moves his lips, except for Ron Paul and a few others maybe. So you never know for sure, but we live in a sea of ignorance. We never know what we're getting when we do politics. I mean, Bush, the 43rd, ran on a peace platform, and look what he did. So you never know for sure, but it's no argument to say since we don't know for sure, we should just throw up our hands or give up or whatever. Michael, I think you're blocking the cameras. Now you're blocking the other camera.
Blocking the third
now
camera.
You're blocking Paul. Now you're blocking that lady. And that little baby. Okay, now let's talk about Gary. Gary Johnson is running on the LP, but my focus in Donald Trump was mainly Trump versus Hillary, not versus Gary. Now, if I had a choice between Gary and Donald, I'd pick Gary. He's not much of a libertarian. He's sort of a quasi-semi-demi-libertarian. But I have a sort of a high, I mark on a curve. I'm a professor. And I think I have a right to hope for more from Gary than from Donald, because Donald doesn't even say he's a libertarian, whereas Gary does. And Gary is not as good as he could be. He's no Ron Paul. He's no Murray Rothbard. But if it was a choice between the two, I would pick Gary, because Gary is less warmongery and less of a loose cannon than is Donald Trump. One last point, and that is, what is my advice to the voters? My advice to the voters is, if you live in a purple state where Hillary and Donald are polled very close, neck and neck, vote for Donald because he needs all the help he can get against Hillary. On the other hand, if you live in a red state or a blue state, where either Hillary is going to win by 20 points or Donald is going to win by 20 points, then vote for Gary. Because in a state where Donald or Hillary is 20 points ahead, either Donald is going to lose for sure and our vote won't help him, or he'll win for sure and our vote won't help him. So then vote for Gary. Now, it's entirely possible that Gary will be the next president of the United States. If he can hold New Mexico, where he's from, and if the Vice President Bill Weld, who is no libertarian, can hold Massachusetts, and Hillary and Donald are very close, such that neither gets 50%, it goes to the House of Representatives, and Donald and Hillary are cordially hated by many of them, and they might pick Gary for all we know. So it's possible that Gary will win, and I'm a supporter of his too. So what I'm trying to do is have my cake and eat it. I'm trying to promote liberty, because if we can get, 5% of the vote in the LP, then they don't have to go through the shenanigans of getting all the signatures to get on the ballot in 2020. And also, the word libertarianism is now used. When I got into libertarianism in 1965 or 6, libertarianism was confused with librarianism or libertinism, or, I mean, they never mentioned libertarianism. Now, mainstream people mention libertarianism, so, you know, thank goodness. And part of this is due to the LP, even though they picked people like Bob Barr, who was no libertarian. And in the race for this year, one of the guys said, one of the candidates for president that Gary beat said, I never heard of Murray Rothbard. It's like a priest saying, I never heard of the Pope. And the other guy said, I reject the non-aggression principle. You reject the non-aggression principle and you call yourself a libertarian? So the Libertarian Party is no better than it should be, than it could be. It could be better. But it's getting, MSNBC, the New York Times, Washington Post, the mainstream CBS, NBC, ABC, mention liberty. So I certainly support Gary, and I don't think he's going to win. But this technique of mine, strategic voting, when Donald doesn't need it, either because he's going to lose or win, vote for Gary. When Donald needs it, vote for Donald. That way we can sort of hedge our bets. So that's my 5 or 10 minute presentation on why the libertarian case for Donald Trump. And now I'll take questions or comments or...
There's a line to fight you and it
Sure.
starts here.
Okay.
Getting next.
Rick?
Oh, I wouldn't say I was going to fight it. I was actually looking for a more mature tree with a low-hanging horizontal limb, but I couldn't find it.
For a noose?
You know, Walter, we had the conversation, but if you had said, I'm for Trump because Congress...
I'm getting closer to him, not because I'm going to jump on him, but because the microphone is in my pocket.
I'm for Trump because more Congress hates him, and if he was in Washington for 4 years, absolutely nothing would get done. And with Hillary, something could get done. You know, I'd be on you like white on rice. The problem I have is really twofold. They're both objectionable, and having your name associated with either of them is personally painful for me. Painful in particular with regards to foreign policy, because threatening to build a wall preventing the free migration of people from the south to the north, which they've historically done, in addition to being a lie, isn't something that is a way to make friends with 1 billion people who speak Spanish. Making consistently derogatory remarks to Muslims, some of whom richly deserve it, just like Christians, is not a real good way to make friends among the Muslim world. I can think of 2 good things that Obama did in the course of being a president. He actually led for about 4 hours. Once with his speech in Cairo, and once with his speech about race after his minister got proven to be a racist. I don't see, and I get what you say about Donald, pardon me, Rump, whatever his name is, having a mutual admiration society with his fellow fascists. I get that part. It's just difficult for me to equate that with intelligent foreign policy. For inflaming the passions of dumb white losers by vilifying younger, more competent Hispanics and Muslims doesn't seem to be in America's best interest with regards to foreign policy.
Well, if I had to summarize what Rick said, he said Donald Trump has got a lot of flaws. Who could
That's pretty charitable.
Who could disagree? But the question is, how does he compare with Hillary? It's not sufficient, I don't think, to say that Donald is a bum. Is he worse or lesser of a bum than Hillary? That's our choice. I mean, if you don't have to
endorse either of them. You could say
they're both bums and move on.
Yeah, you could describe them.
Well, look, Overseer Goody and Overseer Batty were both bad people, but we picked the lesser of 2 evils. That's all we're offered. I mean...
Yeah, but did you set up an organization, Slaves for Overseer A?
Yes. I would set up an organization, Slaves for Overseer Goody. because I want to convince my fellow slaves that Goody will only beat us up once a month, Batty will beat us up every day. And some of the slaves are so irrational as to not want to vote. Oh, and the kicker is that the master says, if you don't vote, we're picking Batty. Well, we should all vote for Goody. Yeah, I'll start a group, overseer, slaves for Goody. Why not? Yeah.
Are you done, Rick?
Yeah.
So, I think many of us agree with almost everything you said. The importance of foreign policy, without a doubt. But the crux of your argument hangs on the idea that you are going to take Donald at his word. You're going to ignore some of the horrendous things he said, like we're going to bomb the shit out of them, and take other things that he said that are more, I guess, favorable to our position, and trust him on his word. And if I was going to try to construct the weakest argument for supporting a politician, that would be it. Supporting him based on what he's told us. So that's the first part.
Like he promised to pay back his debts, right?
But in Walter's defense now, you assume that both of them are pathological liars. That's holding Donald to an unrealistic standard, given the job he's applied for. I mean, in fairness. I don't want to defend Walter, by the way. I'm defending the undefendable.
As I said, how do you tell when a politician is lying? Moves his lips. I think we can probably trust Hillary more because she's less changeable. But what is she saying? Kill, kill, kill. Putin is evil. We got to get Putin. We got to get China. China is messing around in the South Pacific and all that. Hillary is less of a loose cannon. Hillary stands more solid, not fully solid, but she changes her mind on things too. But in foreign policy, I think we can trust Hillary to get us into World War III, which is not a very good thing. You say, well, you can't trust them at all. Well, we live in a sea of ignorance. We can never know. Full information is beyond our ken. We can only judge based on the evidence we're given. And the evidence we're given is that Donald says some pretty good things, some awful things. Hillary says pretty much just awful things. Where does she say anything good? So I deduce or conclude that Donald is a better shot than Hillary and Gary is a better shot than Donald. But mainly, I don't think Gary is going to get a lot of votes. I'm just hoping he gets enough, and the two others are tied or close, so that goes to the House of Representatives.
To follow up.
Sure.
On the issue of voting, don't you acknowledge a mathematical study of that would suggest that the individual voting makes no difference? So whether a person votes or not really is inconsequential, and if that's the case, if it's symbolic, if one decides to vote, they should just vote in a way that pleases themselves.
Well,
whether it's Gary or
I admit that any one vote, unless it's a tie, it's silly. But all of us libertarians, and we are, I don't know, 1%, 5%, 10% in the U.S.
Yeah, but you're a block, but we're not a block. We're individuals.
No, but if I can, I have a little bit of a megaphone in libertarian circles. People read what I write a little bit, and I'm trying to convince my fellow libertarians, of whom there are 5% of the electorate, maybe 10%, depending on how you count it. So any one vote doesn't count, admitted. But all the libertarians in a state where Donald and Hillary are very close, they might push Donald in. So Michael?
Yeah, I think the last question was more in terms of an individual, because each individual makes this decision for themselves. Am I going to vote for anyone? And I would think that the opportunity cost of doing something useful in your life for the hour or half hour, however long you take out of your day to vote, would be much more constructive, taking one of those other opportunity costs, than wasting your time going to the polls.
Well, shut up. No,
4 hours.
I'm just kidding. Look, World War III might be in the offing. World War III is a very serious thing. World War II killed a lot of people. World War I killed a lot of people. World War III will make those two look like a walk in the park. Now, there are many ways to spread liberty.
In Alberta, we voted ourselves a shitload of trouble. just an absolute, the province is basically going bankrupt?
Look, there are a lot of ways to promote liberty. One is meetings like Giant's meeting. Another is the Free State Project. Everyone moves to New Hampshire, and we have more power in New Hampshire than otherwise. Think tanks, the Mises Institute, Cato, Reason, even the Fraser Institute. The ILS, a guy who spoke here, is another way of promoting liberty. But so is politics. And again, I give you a two-word refutation of those who say politics is unimportant. Ron Paul. I was just at the Mises University, and there was a guy in the state legislature of Mississippi who's an anarcho-capitalist Rothbardian. He could be the next Ron Paul. Now, I don't say everyone should get into politics, but I don't think we should denigrate it either and say we should do everything but. And the idea that it takes 4 hours or 2 hours or whatever, well, this is up to each individual. But I'm saying, one, you should consider seriously voting and wasting or spending 2 or 4 hours. And two, yes, there are other things. Look, I'm not a politician. I don't run, although I once ran for New York State Assembly on the Libertarian Party ticket before the LP nationally started. In '69, I ran, but I haven't done it since. Not everyone should do that. My way of doing it is writing books and articles and teaching students and trying to get them to get a PhD so they can teach other students. So there are many ways toward liberty, and I reject this idea of picking out one of them and saying that's no good.
I agree.
They're all good or they're all bad, and my advice to you is to pick the one that's the most fun. I have this co-author of mine, Bill Barnett, at school, and sometimes we have 3 or 4 articles going at the same time, and he'll say, well, which one should I work on now? And I say, whichever is the most fun. Well, you should devote your life to promoting liberty in the way that is the most fun. And if it's not politics, fine, but I'm not asking you to run. I'm just saying vote, and if you vote, either for Donald or Gary.
It seems to me that rather than being fun for libertarian voting for Donald Trump, it would be very painful.
Well, then don't do it. I'm not, threatening anyone that they should.
So I'm from New Mexico, and I've lived 2/3 of my life there. I know Gary Johnson personally. I think he's a wonderful man. He's as principled a libertarian as I know. He takes the test as we all do, and he's right at 100% libertarian. Now, I missed the first part of your argument, but why don't we just vote for Gary? Because if polls show right now that he's at 13%, if he can get 15% of the vote, then we have the beginnings of a movement. He got 1% last night, so if he can get on these debates, I think we're going to see, or I hope perhaps we see a groundswell of support, because you take a poll about how most Americans feel, they have certain libertarian
At the
leanings.
expense of 4 years of Hillary?
Well, you're assuming that he's going to take votes from Trump, and I'm not certain that's true, because he's a social libertarian.
Well,
He
we
will take votes that Bernie Sanders brought to the Democratic Party, because if I take the test, I'm a social libertarian. What's Bernie Sanders? A social libertarian. The problem is he's a socialist.
The problem is we have a very fickle electorate, and you can't trust very uninformed electorate. So everything, I don't know. I would go with the math of the ones that are close or the ones that are far away.
I would just react that Gary isn't that good a libertarian. I think he's way better than Donald Trump, but that's a pretty low barrier to be better libertarian than Donald Trump.
Policy that Gary supports is
He supports many non-libertarian policies. For example, he wanted to go. I am.
Oh, okay.
He wanted to send U.S. troops into Africa. Secondly, he believes in anti-discrimination laws, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is not libertarian. Third, he only wants to legalize marijuana, not anything else. These are 3, but look, I vastly favor him over Donald, which isn't saying much, because Donald is, horrible, just less horrible than a certain lady. Gary is good, but don't say he's the best or the most consistent libertarian, because that's too much. I think he's about as good as I think he's about as good as Rand Paul and a few other senators. He's very good, And it's amazing that he's at 13%, and I think we ought to do everything we can to get him to 15 so he gets in there, and then he might pick up a state or two or three and then become president if Hillary and Donald are close. So we disagree on a minor point, just how wonderful he is. I say he's...
And I will grant, you did educate me in the first couple of points, but I know the man, and he is pro-legalization of all drugs, but that is not a political message that will go across in the United States. So I will grant that he's massaged his position because of that.
I think he's wise to do that. Because
Yeah.
we want to get him to 15%. We want to get him New Mexico and Massachusetts. And I think you're right, that if he did that, he would lower his chances. Well, I think one last question?
Say something. I think on the subject of voting, we have to remember that there are some moral absolutes. And voting is, in essence, an immoral act. It's a violent act. And to subscribe your name to someone, even though they're the lesser of two evils, you are signing your name to the acts that they have either promised to do or won't do or will do in the future. You've put your name down and supported everything they stand for, even though you don't know it, and even though, as you admit, they lie. So the act of voting in secret, which assigns a politician to take and distribute wealth from one party to another who doesn't deserve it, which is the core essence of politics.
Look, I've read Lysander Spooner's No Treason also, and I certainly agree with you. However, suppose I come up to you with a gun and I say, give me your money or I'll shoot you. And you give me your money, and you know that I'm going to turn around and spend it on buying more guns and hiring more gang members, and therefore you're sort of implicated in my criminality, which is roughly the analogy that you're offering, that if you vote...
No one's saying if you don't vote, I'm going to shoot.
The point I'm trying to make is that we are in effect under duress. The justification for you giving your money to the criminal when he's got a gun on you is duress. Well, I think we're under a similar kind of duress, not exactly the same, but an analogous duress. Namely, we're afraid of World War III, and we have children and grandchildren. We don't want them incinerated. Thanks for your attention.
Well, I've decided I agree with you.
Oh, great.
And I'm going to start rule for Trump. And the reason is that he's been through bankruptcy so many times that he has the skill set necessary to run the country. I want you to thank him.